For most of us, Mattel is the company behind Barbie and Hot Wheels. But in the late 70s, it wasn't plastic dolls or die-cast cars that had Mattel executives excited. It was blinking lights. That little gadget, Auto Race, would quietly make history as the world's first handheld electronic game. And in that moment, Mattel, a simple toy company, took its first steps into the world of electronic entertainment. What started with a few beeping lights in the palm of your hand would soon grow into something much bigger. Within just a few years, those same engineers were building a machine that could outthink, outplay, and outshine Atari itself, a console so advanced they called it the intelligent television. But intelligence, as it turns out, isn't always enough to survive. Today, we're exploring how Mattel went from making Barbie dolls to battling Atari in the living room, how the Intellivision became both a technological marvel and a cautionary tale about ambition, innovation, and timing. So grab your controllers and join us as we power on the story of Mattel and the rise and fall of the Intellivision on today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 272nd episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we're exploring the Intellivision, a console that pushed the boundaries of gaming with its innovative hardware, advanced graphics, and ambitious ideas for the era. From its keypad controllers to its iconic games, the Intellivision helped shape the early home gaming market. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably lose every Intellivision game because he forgot to plug in the right overlay. I mean, let's face it, he's too young to remember overlays. But he's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think you'd manage to conquer the Intellivision's games, or would that weird controller just leave you scratching your head?
You know, as many times as I try to get the old Intellivision working and never could, no, I'm not doing it.
Is it still in the house?
You know, I'm pretty sure I just found it recently,
Gotcha.
within the last week. I didn't actually open the box to get a great look, but I'm pretty sure it was the Intellivision because I remember seeing the wood paneling. So it might have been the Atari.
Yeah, it could be one or the other. It could definitely be
Yeah,
one or
one of
the
the
other.
two. I just peeked in the box and then closed it because I knew it wasn't mine and said, all right, I'll deal with that later. So possibly it's still in the house, yes.
Possibly, maybe. We're no closer to knowing than before.
Exactly.
Oh, all right. Well, I have. We're going to be talking about the Intellivision, a lot about the Intellivision. I have a whole lot to talk about today, so let's get right into it. Tell us what else happened during this week in gaming history.
Well, first up, on November 15th, 1994, Blizzard Entertainment released Warcraft Orcs and Humans for the MS-DOS, introducing players to the world of Azeroth and laying the foundation for one of the most enduring franchises in gaming history. Pitting the noble human alliance against the savage orcish horde, the game combined base building, resource management, and tactical combat in real time, helping to define and popularize the real-time strategy, also RTS, genre. Its inclusion of a two-player multiplayer mode via modem or LAN, which in the old day was how you did things before they had wireless routers for you youngins, it was groundbreaking for its time, which fostered early competitive play. Beyond gameplay innovations, Warcraft stood out for its rich lore and cinematic storytelling, traits that would become hallmarks of Blizzard's design philosophy. The success of Warcraft Orcs and Humans paved the way for Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3, and eventually World of Warcraft, making it a cornerstone in both RTS history and modern gaming culture.
It's World of Warcraft. Well, now it's World of Warcraft,
No,
but to me
it's
it was
Warcraft.
Warcraft.
Yeah. I play World of Warcraft. You just played Warcraft.
That is absolutely true. That is 100% a factual statement. So, great game. Paved the way for something even better, most people would argue.
Well, on the topic of great games, not necessarily paving the way for things, unless you want to count the new TV show, which is pretty good. On November 10th, 1995, Sony Computer Entertainment released Twisted Metal for the PlayStation, marking the explosive debut of one of gaming's most iconic vehicular combat franchises. Developed by Single Track, the game dropped players into a chaotic demolition derby where weaponized cars fought for survival across destructible arenas. Each driver, ranging from deranged clowns to vengeful soldiers, piloted a unique vehicle with signature special attacks, all vying to win a deadly tournament hosted by the enigmatic Calypso, who promised to grant any wish at a terrible cost. Praised for its fast paced action, dark humor, and inevitable level design, Twisted Metal became a cornerstone of the early PlayStation library and helped define the vehicular combat genre. We covered its wild story back in episode 167, so give it a listen if you'd like to learn more. Gross.
Was it a wild story?
Well, I guess you'll have to go back to 167 and find out. Yep,
Yeah.
just for you, Dave.
I know. Thank you. Move on.
Next up, on November 2000, Counter-Strike was officially released for Microsoft Windows, developed by Valve and published by Sierra Studios. What began as a fan-made mod for Half-Life evolved into one of the most influential multiplayer shooters ever created, defining the tactical team-based FPS genre. Players joined either the terrorist or counter-terrorist sides, competing in intense, objective-driven matches that rewarded strategy, communication, and pinpoint accuracy over the run-and-gun chaos. Its minimalist design and deep competitive balance made Counter-Strike an instant phenomenon in LAN cafes and early online gaming communities. More than 2 decades later, its legacy endures through sequels like CS Source, CS Global Offensive, and CS2, keeping it at the heart of esports culture. We explored its lasting impact back in episode 115, so check it out if you'd like to learn more about this genre-defining shooter.
Played a lot of Counter Strike back in my day. Never was any good at it.
I have probably 5 minutes into it, but that's okay.
Yeah. I have a little bit more
But,
than 5 hours.
well, that's good, Dave. And on the topic of genre-defining shooters, on November 15th, 2001, Halo Combat Evolved launched alongside Microsoft's first console, the Xbox, forever changing the landscape of first-person shooters and console gaming as a whole. Developed by Bungie, the game followed Super Soldier Master Chief and his AI companion Cortana as they battled the Alien Covenant and uncovered the mysteries of the ring world known as Halo. With its rich sci-fi storytelling, intuitive controls, and groundbreaking mechanics like regenerating shields and the two-weapon system, Halo set new standards for immersion and balance in shooters. Its split-screen and land-based multiplayer modes fueled a grassroots competitive scene, laying the foundation for modern console esports. Universally praised for its design, atmosphere, and replayability, Halo Combat Evolved became a defining title for the Xbox and one of the most influential games ever made. We covered its history back in episode 168, so give it a listen if you'd like to learn more.
Nice.
Yeah, Twisted Metal and then Halo Combat Evolved. It was a very good couple of weeks we had going on there.
It was indeed.
And last up for this week in gaming history, on November 13th, 2007, Ubisoft released Assassin's Creed for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, launching what would become one of the most influential franchises in modern gaming. Set during the Third Crusade in the 12th century, the game followed Altair ibn La'ad, wow, never said that last name, a skilled member of the Assassin Brotherhood, as he uncovered conspiracies woven through history. Blending stealth, parkour, and open world exploration, Assassin's Creed broke new ground with its seamless climbing mechanics and richly detailed historical cities like Jerusalem, Acre, and Damascus. It also introduced the Animus, a sci fi device that let modern characters relive ancestral memories, bridging historical fiction with contemporary storytelling. Praised for its ambition and atmosphere, Assassin's Creed became a massive commercial and critical success, laying the groundwork for one of Ubisoft's defining franchises. We explored its origins and legacy back in episode 116, so give it a listen if you want to learn more.
Do you want to learn more?
Well, I kind of already was a part of that episode, so I do feel like I learned about Assassin's Creed, but I guess we might want to learn about something different today. Something like the not so intelligent vision.
Well,
Terrible joke. Anyway, proceed.
terrible. By by the late 1960s, Mattel was one of the biggest toy companies in the world. Barbie was a cultural icon that they made, and Hot Wheels were flying off the shelf. But by the mid 1970s, the world was changing fast. Suddenly kids were interested in blinking lights and beeping sounds rather than all those dolls and die-cast cars that had made Mattel successful up until this point. In the mid 70s, the age of electronics was upon the world, and Mattel, frankly, didn't want to get left behind. No surprise. No business wants to get left behind. In 1976, the company took its first steps into this new frontier with a little gadget called Auto Race. At first, Auto Race looks just like a calculator that someone slapped a steering wheel on, but under the hood, it was historical and revolutionary. It was the first handheld electronic game ever built using entirely solid state electronics. There were no moving parts other than the controls and the on and off switch. Everything, absolutely everything, the cars, the motion, the sound effects, they were all handled through a tiny chip that was originally designed for calculators. It was the brainchild of engineer George Close who realized that calculator hardware could be repurposed for something far more entertaining. Partnering with Mark Lesser at Rockwell International, they reworked a calculator chip to handle the display, sound, and gameplay logic all in just 512 bytes of code. That's less memory than it takes to store this sentence about it being less memory to take to store the sentence. Lesser, who had never written a line of code before, learned assembly language on the job, and he spent over a year squeezing the entire game into that, impossibly small space. Just ridiculous to think of these days. The gameplay was simple but addictive. You drove a little LED car up a 3-lane track, dodging oncoming traffic, shifting through 4 gears to go faster and faster. Every bump or collision sent you sliding backwards. And basically, the challenge was that you had to finish 4 laps before the timer hit 99 seconds. And it did everything that the kids wanted, right? It beeped, it blinked. To them, it was pure magic. It was something that they had never seen before. And it sold for $24.99, which was a lot of money at that time. And still, people loved it. It flew off the shelves. It proved to Mattel that electronics were not just a fad, they were the future of play. Up until that point, there were people at the company who had been kind of skeptical about the future being electronics, but suddenly, when that started selling, they saw the potential. And so the next year, they followed that up with Mattel Football, another LED based handheld that became a holiday phenomenon. And then there was baseball and basketball and so on and so forth. By 1978, the success of those little red lights had really changed the company forever. And so Mattel formed a brand new division called Mattel Electronics that was headquartered in Hawthorne, California. Within months, that division exploded in size. They were hiring engineers, hiring programmers, hiring designers, all so they could chase whatever the next big thing was. Those Mattel was really an electronic household name with their little handhelds, but they frankly weren't going to be content with pocket-sized games forever. They had their eyes set on the living room, due to a, let's just say, another, as Rob put it, wood paneled console, but this one was made by Atari. And that's really where the story of the Intellivision begins. It wasn't born in a vacuum, Rob. It was Mattel's answer to Atari's runaway success, right? By 1977, the Atari Video Computer System, the VCS as we know it, later on the 2600, had really turned home gaming into a cultural phenomenon, as we've learned, going through episodes. And Mattel's executives were just watching those cartridges fly off the shelves with envy, right? So their handhelds had proven that electronics could sell, but the VCS was on a whole other level entirely. Just, whole different level. If Atari could transform the television into an entertainment device, Mattel figured that it could build something even smarter, so to speak, something worthy of the name intelligent television, aka Intellivision. Now, that project took shape inside of Mattel's Blue Sky Research Group in Hawthorne, California. It was led by engineers Richard Chang and David Chandler. As part of that team, they envisioned a modular console that would one day grow into an entire home computer. Chandler, who had came from the aerospace world, pushed for hardware that could leapfrog Atari rather than imitate it. And so he went out there and started evaluating chipsets. There's some really fascinating, you can actually find in like the Internet Archive, like the old internal documents with all his notes comparing all these chipsets. And he compared chipsets from National Semiconductor, from MOS, and Texas Instruments. And eventually he settled on a General Instruments CP1610. That's a 16-bit processor that they wanted to put into this device at a time when every single competitor, almost every single competitor, but specifically the Atari, was still running on 8 bits alone. That alone could really give the Intellivision a serious edge. The chip could juggle more calculations per cycle, and its companion that they chose, which is a television interface chip, could display up to 16 colors at a 160 by 196 resolution. Isn't that crazy to think of? That was impressive at the time, right? 160 by 196.
Wow.
I know. But get this, the Atari 2600 was only 160 by 192. Let's scratch that because that resolution, 4 lines, is not going to make or break something, right?
Yeah,
But the
might.
Atari 2600 only managed 4 on-screen colors at once.
What were they?
I have zero clue.
Oh my goodness! Come on.
I have
You know
zero
I'm gonna ask
clue.
these questions.
Yeah. But the Intellivision's teleface, the STIC, they call it, standard television interface chip, could do 16 colors. So 4 times the colors. The Intellivision sound chip also had 3 independent audio channels that let designers layer speech like tones over crowd noise over background music, whereas Atari only had a single channel audio chip that could only manage bleeps and blips, intermittently with the music because you only had a single audio channel. For all purposes, on paper, the Intellivision was a technological powerhouse. It was designed in every which way to be superior to the Atari 2600. That power, though, that kind of power, at a time when designers and programmers were just learning about programming in general, that was kind of an unwieldy power to have, right? And so to
Yeah.
help manage that, Mattel hired a technological consulting firm called APH. It was a small team of Caltech engineers led by Glenn Hightower to write the console's core software. And under David Rolfe from APH, they built what's called the executive, like EXEC, the executable, you know. It's a miniature operating system that was embedded inside every single Intellivision. And that's really one of the things that makes the Intellivision so fascinating. That wasn't just background code. It was a full software framework that made the Intellivision one of the first consoles to standardize how games were built. It was an engine of sorts. It had reusable routines for sprite management, collision detection, input handling, animation timing, and even sound generation. So developers didn't have to reinvent the wheel for every cartridge they made. They could call on these routines built into the Intellivision itself and focus on what made their game unique from every other game on the market. And that made programming and designing for the Intellivision and its games, frankly, really efficient, since that operating system, so to speak, handled so many core functions. Effectively, what was only a 4K game cartridge, like all the rest at the time, could really genuinely behave like an 8K cartridge because it used that shared memory space for its logic, while borrowing the pre-written code from the system ROM, so to speak. And that's how Mattel was looking forward to keeping cartridge costs down while still shipping titles that felt really complex for what they were. But there was a catch to doing things that way. Because that executable was designed to be flexible, it wasn't particularly fast. In fact, its universal timing loop ran games at the most of 20 frames per second. Technically, the Intellivision on paper could deliver up to 60 hertz. And so, there was a trade off there. Now, what that did for gamers, from our perception, is that really gave the Intellivision a distinct pacing. It was smooth but really deliberate, so to speak. It worked really beautiful for sport games and strategy games, but sometimes when you were trying to bring fast action arcade games over to the platform, it made them feel really sluggish by comparison. Now, eventually, they worked past that limitation. Some of the third party developers like Activision, Imagic, and Coleco would figure out how to bypass that operating system entirely in order to run their own code at 30 or 60 hertz, meaning that eventually we did get every ounce of performance out of the Intellivision. But that doesn't change the fact that at a time when the industry was at its infancy, having those pre-built codes, having that operating system, so to speak, inside the Intellivision was absolutely revolutionary for its time. It turned the Intellivision into more of a programmable platform, something that could really scale as new developers came aboard. And frankly, that's what Mattel needed, because they weren't just competing with Atari's hardware, they were really competing and trying to build and surpass an entire ecosystem. Now, under Rolf's supervision, with some artwork from Dave James at Mattel, APH used that operating system, like I said, really flexible, to rapidly produce the console's launch lineup. Many of those early games, the first 19 cartridges that released with it, were coded by Caltech summer students.
Oh, nice.
By the 1980 holiday season, about when this was going nationwide, like I said, there had been 19 cartridges. These 19 cartridges formed the first generation of Intellivision titles. They're generally grounded in real world themes like Las Vegas poker and blackjack, Major League Baseball, NFL football, Armor Battle, Sea Battle, and B 17 Bomber. We have that one. I like it. It's got the speech thing. Mattel wasn't chasing flashy arcade titles, they were really aiming for authenticity. Each of these games came with a pair of plastic keypad overlays that turned the controller into a customized interface. There'd either be a playbook or a radar screen or a flight console. And frankly, when you're going for authenticity like this, with the controller being what it is, go look it up if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's got like 20,000 buttons. The learning curve could be incredibly steep. Most of the games legitimately required players to read the manual before playing them. Frankly, though, that complexity was part of the system's identity. The Intellivision wasn't marketed by Mattel as a toy. They marketed it as a serious home entertainment system, quote unquote, a thinking person's console. And that wasn't accidental. They deliberately distanced themselves from the bright plastic toys that had generally defined the company's past. Their early ads for the Intellivision use sleek visuals and calm narration and design language that they borrowed from stereo and hi-fi equipment. If you'll recall, a few weeks ago we did an episode on Electronic Games Magazine, and we talked about how the earliest video game journalism was in a magazine called Video, and that is because originally like that was the place that a lot of people felt video games should be, in the middle of home theaters alongside the hi-fi equipment, the stereo equipment, and that's where the Intellivision was positioned. As Rob put it, it had wood paneling. It was a bronze and wood master component. That's what the main console is called, and it genuinely looked like it belonged on an adult entertainment center, not a kid's bedroom floor. And again, even the name Intellivision was chosen to suggest intellect and sophistication. This wasn't a toy for children like the rest of them. It was a machine for families, for adults, and for anyone who wanted, I don't know, the closest thing to the real thing. Now, Mattel test marketed the system in the Fresno market during the 1979 holiday season. It was bundled with Las Vegas Poker and Blackjack, and despite its incredibly steep $205 price tag, it quickly sold out. And so, encouraged by that response, they launched it nationwide in 1980. And again, the message was clear. This wasn't just another game console, this was the dawn of intelligent entertainment. For the first time, realistically, Atari had real competition. Not just another clone, like so many of the others were, but a technically superior system that looked, sounded, and played nothing else on the market. The console wars were on. Rob, Mattel called the Intellivision intelligent television, and it really was ahead of its time. It combined sleek design with advanced tech to make gaming feel sophisticated. And honestly, that's kind of how I feel about podcasting today, combining tech with sophistication.
So you're saying that a podcast can be as advanced as the Intellivision, but easier to use?
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. And that's why I use Zencaster. It's the all in one podcasting platform that makes recording simple. You just log in from your browser, hit record, and you're instantly capturing studio quality audio and up to 4K video. No complicated setup or extra equipment required.
Okay, but what if something crashes? The Intellivision didn't exactly have cloud backups.
Well, that's where Zencaster's multi layer backups come in. Even if your connection drops, your recordings are saved safely in the highest quality. You'll never lose a take.
Yeah, but what about editing? Those early consoles didn't come with a pause button.
Yeah, there's no need to worry there either. Zencaster's post production tools automatically clean up your audio, removing background noise, cutting out those ums and uhs, balancing your levels, and smoothing everything out. You'll sound like a pro every time.
Okay, but once I've recorded, how do I share the show? I don't have a Mattel sales team at my disposal.
That's probably one of the most impressive parts. They make distributing your podcast to all the major platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts as easily as pressing start. From recording to release, everything happens in one place.
So it's like having the whole entertainment system built into one machine. I That's something I get, but how do our listeners get started?
Well, you just go to Zencaster, zencastr.com/pricing, and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Listeners, I want you to have the same easy experience I do for all of my podcasting needs, so hit up the website and share your story.
So if you've been thinking about starting your own show, grab that discount and power up. Intellivision style.
That's right. Head over to the Zencaster, use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month.
So now, let's get back to the story of the Intellivision.
Rob, when Mattel's Intellivision went nationwide in 1980, it didn't just compete with the Atari 2600, it genuinely challenged it. Mattel didn't just want to be another face in the crowd, they wanted to position themselves as the sophisticated alternative. Atari had the name recognition and all the arcade ports, but Mattel had the numbers on paper, twice the processing power, richer graphics, and a sound chip that could actually carry a tune. The hardware, it wasn't just different, it was better. And so Mattel's marketing department really leaned into that difference. They leaned into it hard. They built their campaign around a simple, devastating message: our games just look better.
Nice. That's wow.
I mean, what else you got? Mattel found the perfect spokesperson in journalist and novelist George Plimpton, whose calm intellectual presence gave the brand an air of authority. Plimpton wasn't just pitching games, he was comparing them like a film critic breaking down shot composition. In those legendary ads, you'd see an Atari baseball game, a handful of stick figures smacking a square ball, placed side by side with the television's Major League Baseball, complete with a diamond shaped field, color uniforms, and moving players. You can actually see the ball being hit, Plimpton would say, pointing out every difference. And at the end of these ads, the tagline sealed it: Intellivision, the closest thing to the real thing. It was a bold move, and it worked. Atari had been the only name in town for years, but now parents in the electronics aisles were watching side by side comparisons that made the Atari look ancient. The Intellivision was marketed like hi fi equipment, and Plimpton's professional tone turned gaming into something almost classy. The Atari had fun, but Mattel had realism. And the games, frankly, back that up too. Titles like NFL football and NBA basketball and PGA golf, they weren't just pick up and play arcade games, they were simulations. Players called plays, aimed passes, and adjusted strategy. The controllers, numeric keypad, and overlays gave you access to dozens of commands that just a simple joystick couldn't replicate. It was slower paced for sure, but that realism really became the selling point. Mattel's what they called Sport Network became the system's backbone. Major League Baseball, frankly, was the standout. It was one of the first video games that was officially licensed by a major sports organization. And the realism was so impressive that even critics who found a controller awkward had to admit this was as close at the time as you could get to a televised game on a home console, which is hilarious to think about in a modern context.
Well, modern context, yeah, but for the
That's what I
time,
mean.
Gabe.
Sports weren't the only focus. Mattel's team, now bolstered by in house programmers that are known collectively as the Blue Sky Rangers, they started expanding into new genres. There were strategy games like Sea Battle and Utopia, adventure titles like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and then licensed tie ins like Tron Deadly Disc and Burger Time. Each one really leaned into the Intellivision's technical strengths. There were smoother animation, layered sound, and brighter color palettes. As a result, Atari really tried to counterpunch with its own new hardware. That's the Atari 5200, but Mattel was genuinely building momentum at the time. By 1981, they had captured nearly 20% of the home console market and sold over a million units, climbing to 3.75 million systems and 20 million cartridges by 1983. That's, I mean, to go from 0 to 20% in a year is impressive, and then to just keep on going at such a amazing rate. Like, yeah, Mattel made a dent for sure.
Yeah,
For
no,
sure.
that's a good amount for 3 years or 2 years, really.
For a brief, glorious window, Mattel Electronics wasn't just a division of a toy company. It was legitimately a global technology powerhouse. that employed nearly 1,800 people across multiple countries, all stuck in a rivalry with Atari, right? But that rivalry wasn't just limited to the systems, but just limited to the ads. Mattel conquered them in other ways. They directly rebranded their consoles for competitor store shelves. The Intellivision hardware appeared as Sears Super Video Arcade to sit right next to the Atari on Sears shelves. The Radio Shack Tandyvision 1, and even in Japan, they had Bandai branded Intellivisions. Every one of those deals, those branding deals, put the Intellivision into more homes, and every one of those homes meant one less Atari owner. Frankly, by 1982, Mattel's confidence was sky high. I mean, can you blame them? 20+% of the market and then some. They spun Mattel Electronics off into its own company. They opened offices in Europe and Taiwan, and they ramped up marketing even further. The Intellivision name was everywhere on TV, in magazines. There were even Sunday paper inserts boasting about 16-bit power. And for a while, it genuinely seemed like Mattel had done the impossible, that they were openly taking on Atari and in position to win. But while the company was winning this war of perception, there were cracks already starting to show behind the scene, cracks that would genuinely soon widen into a collapse between overpromised add-ons, ambitious peripherals, and an expanding market that, as we know, was starting to overcrowd itself. Mattel's intelligent television, so to speak, was about to face a very dumb problem, which is reality. By 1982, they had built a technological marvel, and that was exactly the problem. The engineers behind the Intellivision weren't content to stop at success. They wanted to redefine what a home console could be. Atari might have been happy selling joysticks and cartridges, but Mattel's team envisioned a bigger future, one where your game system was also your family's computer and your music studio and your source for downloadable entertainment. And so they started to create things to this end. Their first big leap was the keyboard component. It was a very ambitious add on meant to turn the Intellivision into a full fledged computer. It featured dual processors, no joke. It had a built in cassette drive, input for a microphone, a RAM expansion, and support for peripherals like a printer. On paper, it was incredible. I mean, dual processors in 1982, for real?
Yeah, it's pretty insane. I never would have thought that.
Uh, it was years ahead of its time. Years ahead of its time. It was honestly a disaster. The hardware was complex. Dual processors. What more do I have to say? Shoot, I built my first dual processor in like what 2000, 2001, and it was complex, expensive at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
Unreliable in the 80s too. I mean, it was all the things you don't want technology to be. Engineers kept revising the design to make it more efficient, but every time they revised it, it introduced new problems. Mattel, to their credit, had been advertising the keyboard component long before it was ready, promising consumer for ages that it would arrive, quote unquote, any day now.
Oh, I know that line.
I know. Dude, we gripe now about games and their delays. Like, we recently just got the GTA 6 delay, but they've been doing that since the beginning of time.
Yeah, true.
After years of missed deadlines and growing consumer complaints, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, launched an investigation into Mattel for false advertising on the keyboard component. And so, to avoid heavy fines, Mattel quietly recalled the few thousand units that they actually had shipped. They refunded all those buyers and they buried the keyboard project. There are a few keyboard components out there that escape destruction. They are incredibly rare collector's items, part relic, part cautionary tale, I guess you could say. Still determined, though, to deliver on its original promise, Mattel tried to do the same again with a cheaper alternative, which was the ECS, or Entertainment Computer System. It ditched the fancy cassette drive and dual processor setup for a simple keyboard and a basic programming cartridge. It worked well enough, but it really lacked the power or any of the excitement or wow factor of the keyboard component, you know? By the time it finally hit the shelves in 83, the public had genuinely moved on. Consumers didn't want, by that point, computers that pretended to be game consoles. They wanted game consoles instead that were fun and affordable. In the meantime, though, these engineers at Mattel, they just kept working and their innovations kept piling up. They made the IntelliVoice, which was an add-on that brought digitized speech to games like Space Spartans and B-17 Bomber. They made the Play Cable module that allowed players to directly download games from their cable provider. That was decades before the internet made that an actual thing. I know, isn't that crazy to think of?
Yeah, I didn't know that was. You said that was what year?
That would be what year they do to Play Cable, 82 or 83?
83? Wow, that's.
So, somewhere in there.
Never would have thought that was a thing back in 1983.
I know. They even redesigned the Intellivision 2, introduced detachable controllers. It was slimmer, and no joke, it came with an optional adapter that let you play Atari 2600 games.
Hmm.
They were literally invading Atari's territory.
Well, you had to back then, you know?
And let's be honest, all of these ideas were groundbreaking, right? But they came too fast, too close together, and just way they were all ahead of their time, too far ahead of what the market could handle at the time. You know, instead of focusing on great software, which is what Atari did, frankly, Mattel flooded its audience with add-ons and accessories. Each one kind of splintered the user base and just confused their consumers. That message that had once been so clear, you know, the closest thing to the real thing, was now getting lost in a tangle of cables, modules, and frankly, unmet promises. And then, as we all know, since we're here in 1983, the bottom fell out, right? By late 1983, the video game industry was drowning in hardware and cheap software. Retailers were overloaded, consumers were overwhelmed, and confidence in video games evaporated pretty much overnight. We know that as the video game crash of 1983. And as we know, the crash didn't spare anyone. Atari imploded, Coleco struggled, and Mattel Electronics was hit especially hard. Warehouses became filled with unsold consoles, their add on peripherals that nobody wanted now, and unsold cartridges. Losses for the company, Mattel Electronics, climbed over $280 million in a single year.
Wow.
And so in January of 1984, Mattel parent company pulled the plug on Mattel Electronics. The company that had once revolutionized handheld games and challenged Atari's throne was now gone. Its employees were laid off, and its assets were sold for pennies on the dollar. For all its innovation, Mattel Electronics in the end had fallen victim to the same thing that defined it, which was ambition. The irony is frankly hard to miss. The same vision that made the Intellivision a technological marvel also genuinely doomed it. You know, it wasn't lack of imagination that killed Mattel Electronics, it was having too much of it. You know, when they collapsed in 1984, we all thought that the world thought that the Intellivision would vanish with it, but frankly, its second life was just beginning. A former Mattel executive called Terry Valesky saw untapped potential in the leftover consoles and loyal fans who still wanted to play. So he and a few investors bought the rights to the Intellivision name, their games, and their unsold stock for about $20 million, forming Intellivision Incorporated, later renamed to the INTV Corporation. At first, the company simply repackaged Mattel's leftover hardware. They sold it through mail order catalogs and discount bins. The boxes were cheaper, the manuals were black and white, but the price was right, and so families on a budget genuinely responded. Once that stock ran out, INTV went a step further, hiring back several former Mattel programmers to release games that had to finish, rather, games that had been stranded in development. And so we got new titles like Thunder Castle, World Series Baseball, and World Cup Soccer that finally saw the light of day, alongside some new innovative titles like Super Pro Football and Chip Shop Super Pro Golf. A later version, an updated INTV System 3, as it was called, that was later rebranded to the Super Pro system, looked nearly identical to the original master component, but instead of bronze and wood, it had a black and silver finish. Most importantly, though, it was affordable. It was only about $60 for the console and $20 for each game. And that made it a solid budget choice in an era that put it right in competition with the Atari 7800. And at this point, it would have also been the Nintendo Entertainment System.
God damn.
It do- okay, so let's talk about that for a second. It sometimes blows my mind that the NES, the Atari, and the Intellivision all coexisted. I mean, the Atari and the Intellivision were on their tail end, right? I mean, for all purposes, I know the Atari lasted a long time because of other countries, but I mean, like, they existed at the same time. They existed at the same time. It's just
Yeah,
crazy.
that is really crazy. I'm just more blown away. $60 for a console and 20 for a game. Take me
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Against all odds, IMTV kept the Intellivision alive for 6 more years. They released over 20 new games that pushed the entire library to about 125 titles. They even dabbled in NES publishing, publishing Monster Truck Rally before finally filing for bankruptcy in 1991. But I'm sorry, but Intellivision's story doesn't even end there. Many of its original developers, quote unquote, the Blue Sky Rangers, reclaimed the rights to the Intellivision name in the 1990s, and they founded Intellivision Productions under programmer and archivist Keith Robinson. Through that company, they began re-releasing classic games on PCs, on modern consoles, and plug-and-play TV units that genuinely worked to preserve the system's legacy for new generations. And then decades after that, the name surfaced once again when Tommy Tallarico announced the Intellivision Amico, which is a modern, family-friendly console that is inspired by the spirit of his original, which frankly we still haven't seen yet. The new Intellivision's journey has been rocky, but frankly, the fact that it exists kind of proves the same things that Intellivision fans have known for like 40 years. You can't keep a good idea or a good console down for long. People want it back, right? I want my Nintendo back.
Yeah.
I guess the thing is, Rob, when you look back at the Intellivision today, it, it's easy to see it as a product of its time, right? It's a relic of the early 80s console war, of the first console war. It marked the first true challenge to Atari's empire. That legitimately is, as far as most of us are concerned, the first real console war in gaming history. It introduced concepts that we now take for granted, like licensed sport games. Um, its controller overlays hinted at customizable inputs, something that we is so standard nowadays. Voice synthesis was ahead of its time. Downloadable content through Play Cable, ahead of its time, frankly. You know?
100%.
Its focus on realism over reflexes really laid the groundwork for this future of sports simulations. And it has games like Utopia that quietly birthed an entire genre. We've never talked about Utopia before, but it gave birth to the God game genre years before SimCity or Civilization, Populous, any of those ever existed. The Intellivision also helped professionalize game development. You know, the creation of its little operating system, the recruitment of dedicated programmers, the rise of its little, Blue Sky Rangers, that turned what had been like a solo, really kind of cottage industry into more of an organized production pipeline. For better or worse, that structure, not what Atari was doing at the time, became the foundation for how console software would be developed moving forward. And let's be honest, the Intellivision proved early on something that we know now to be a fact, that innovation could come from anywhere. I think we take that for granted nowadays, right? Because we're so used to it. In a world where we have a Microsoft Xbox and we have an Amazon Luna and we have a Google phones and this, we're so used to these tech companies moving from one place to the other in terms of, moving out of their lane, so to speak, but that was not common at the time. This was a toy company that turned their curiosity into competition, and in doing so, genuinely pushed gaming forward. The Intellivision may not have really survived the crash, but its DNA certainly did. And you can still see the traces of it in every sports sim, every console add on, and every bold leap of imagination that, risks going too far. So if you want to keep exploring how the story of if you want to keep exploring the story of how gaming consoles evolved, we've covered plenty more stops along that road. You can check out episodes like 139, where we talked about the Neo Geo and its arcade perfect ambitions, episode 171, where we dove into Betrayal and the birth of the Sony PlayStation, and episode 203, where we explored how the NES rebuilt the gaming world after the crash of 1983, that we know the Intellivision didn't nearly survive as well. You can, of course, find all these episodes on our website over at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can listeners find on our website?
You can find a calendar of our future episode topics and what we will be talking about in our coming weeks. You can find a link to our Discord channel where you can come chat with Dave and I about either episode topics, gaming related topics, or maybe anything else. You never know till you find out. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can help support us and get access to ad-free and unedited versions of all of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. Anything about a game, a person, a technology, a console. We've covered a few places as well. We'll tell you each story. We hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. When we sit down to research new topics each week, we get excited when we find new things to share with you. It's a fantastic cycle of teaching and learning, learning and teaching, and in celebration of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Play cable, man.
Isn't that cool?
That's just you said that, and when you explained it, my mind was just blown. Like 1983, and we have a cable that allows you to download games. Like it's such a common thing now, but having grown up in the late 90s, early 2000s, where everything was on a disc, the thought of downloading something, it's obviously we had dial-up internet to begin and it was just take forever and stuff. In 1983 you could download games. I that just
Can I blow your mind a little bit more?
Sure, go for it.
The service itself released in officially launched in June of 1980.
Yeah, that just my mind, I can't comprehend that. Like obviously it's way before my time, but I just, even now, like it seems like it can be a hassle, so to have had it back then, just mind-blowing.
Let's
So
see,
that's mine.
because I don't know if we'll ever really have a chance to talk about this again. Maybe I'll pull it out, but it's launched in June 1980. Obviously, subscriptions were available for a monthly fee. Up to 20 titles were available each month. The commercials for the service featured former professional baseball player Mickey Mantle.
Huh. Okay.
According to an article, the service was available in 13 cities in 1981. Let's see. Cable operators complained about the high cost the computer needed to run the service, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, we know. It was discontinued in 1984 after the crash. The Play Cable channel was broadcast from a PDP-11 mini computer that would be located in each of the subscribers' cable companies. and then the adapter and the computer would talk to one another through an FM receiver. Like they use the computer, like the cable interface and the FM receiver to get the channel catalog. That's kind of interesting. So nice, very nice.
So yeah, that's my takeaway, Dave. What about yourself?
I never realized how technologically superior the Intellivision was. I mean, by in every which way, it was a genuinely superior system. I mean, 16-bit processor over the 8-bit, three channels over one on the Atari, four times the color, right? 16 instead of four, like every which way. I mean, we know that that doesn't always make that the most popular console because the most technologically superior console doesn't always win the wars these days. But I just never knew. I never knew that was the case. I never knew that was the case. So it was really interesting to just see how much better it actually was. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, that is pretty insane when you think about it.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, pretty cool stuff. It's it may have gone by the wayside, but it was a pretty sweet console while it lasted.
Yes, it was. All right. Before I take it out of here and look ahead to next week, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
Well, I will just take one quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world to have you along as we learn about some pretty cool old stuff. Sometimes not always old, but in this case, pretty old. So pretty cool. So thank you.
As the screen fades to black on Mattel's grand experiment, we're left with a story that feels equal parts triumph and tragedy. At its heart, the story wasn't just about a console, it was about ambition. Mattel is a toy company that dared to dream beyond plastic and into pixels. They didn't just want to compete with Atari, they wanted to outthink them, to bring intelligence and sophistication into the living room. And for a while they did. But with progress always comes a price. Every innovation, the add ons, the modular vision of a home computer, it all pushed boundaries that the market wasn't ready for. In trying to leap into the future, Mattel forgot that even the smartest machines need time to find their audience. And so when the crash came, it didn't just erase profits, it erased possibility. In the end, the Intellivision story isn't just about what it's built, it's more so now about what it's left behind. It helped define the idea of realism in sports games, pioneered licensed partnerships, and proved that players wanted depth as much as excitement. Its operating system laid the groundwork for standardized game development, while its modular add ons hinted at the connected ecosystems we take for granted today. Even decades later, you can see its fingerprints everywhere, from downloadable content to the belief that consoles can be powerful and personal. The Intellivision may have fallen, but its influence never did. It taught the industry that innovation isn't just about playing the game, it's about continuously pushing it to be better. Next week, we're setting down the Intellivision controllers and stepping into the shadows with Hitman Codename 47. Released in 2000, the stealth action classic introduced players to Agent 47, a cold and calculated assassin whose missions redefine strategic gameplay. From its emphasis on freedom of choice to its meticulous design, Hitman Codename 47 set the stage for a franchise that remains iconic today. Join us as we explore its histories, mechanics, and legacy on next week's calculated trip down memory card lane. To the thing.
Skibby dim dim dap dap doo.